All right. Welcome, Christa, to the podcast. We're going to do a part two. Excited to have you and we get to talk to you all the time, but it's nice to be able to share your knowledge with everybody.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
We have a lot of great questions for you today, but someone just found us from this YouTube. Could you explain to us why nutrition is important for IBD athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we know, nutrition plays a really big role with our IBD. And then especially if we're adding on any sort of athletic endeavor or exercise for that matter, nutrition really plays a protective role for our gut. And so making sure that we have appropriate fueling and hydration as well really does protect the gut from any further damage. And that obviously gets more and more important the longer duration that you're exercising or the more intensely that you're exercising. But at any rate, we want to make sure that we have appropriate fueling strategies so that we do protect and so that we have enough energy to fuel whatever activity we're asking our bodies to do. And us with IBD, we have some level of inflammation on board. We're probably sitting at a little bit higher needs. So making sure that we think about this aspect of fueling our activity is really important to just keep our bodies protected. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned that extends to anybody who's active, really.
Yeah.
I feel, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel like underfueling is a chronic thing with a lot of the things we see. Like we see that in athletes, we see it in IBD, we might see it in, someone trying to lose weight or different stages of life. Underfueling is across the board a concern or an issue.
Yeah, and I feel like in the IBD population, that can be really scary to eat. Those with IBD, we typically will have either some level of fear related to what to eat or when to eat. And so underfueling, can be even more of a challenge because you may just be naturally not getting enough in because of the fear related. So a lot of that comes into play.
I notice when sometimes I will be underfueling too, and it's like out of habit. You just get used to certain things. If you don't have the same hunger cues, your hunger cues can change a lot with age, with stress, with IBD. Chronic dieting, you can sort of lose that mind-body connection, and so you just kind of get in these habits and not necessarily intentionally.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I've noticed that even personally, where if there is a little bit more inflammation on board and, maybe it's just harder to eat, and then you're kind of following that pattern over time. You may not even notice that you're necessarily doing it. But you will start to these kind of underfueling symptoms that we'll probably talk about at some point today. They start to creep up and they're not as overt as you might think that they are, especially initially. And so I think kind of being aware of some of the things that are happening in the body as that underfueling starts to take its toll on the body are important to recognize early on.
And Christa, what are some of those signs? I feel like I classify myself as an IBD athlete, and I feel kind of cool saying that. But what would be some things I would be looking for?
Yeah. Usually what I'll notice is it kind of starts subtly, like I mentioned before. If you're kind of in tune with what your body's doing, you would notice a little bit of fatigue, heavy legs, kind of these shorter term things that I've noticed people talk about, and or even bonking. So what I mean by that is just literally like the body is saying, I cannot continue to function. So activity has to stop, pretty abruptly. So people would classify that as bonking, maybe being a little more short of breath, or just even fogginess, brain fogginess, like you're not able to concentrate like you normally are. That just kind of starts to dwindle a little bit. And so those are kind of the shorter term consequences. And then as underfueling compounds and becomes more significant, then we will start to see, all of the different organ systems take a hit if there's just not enough energy coming in. And that is pretty widespread across the body. So this is in the literature too. So this would be considered relative energy deficiency in sport. And there's a whole schematic, that lots of practitioners work off of. And it really is like an extrapolation of the female athlete triad. So if you've heard low energy and bone health and menstrual dysfunction, we have always known that is one piece of this puzzle, but now they've kind of extrapolated it. And we see if underfueling compounds over time, we're going to see like the GI system take a hit, cardiovascular system, psychological, growth and development, metabolic, hematological, endocrine, like bone, everything starts to take a hit, and everybody kind of responds differently. So we know that some females may not ever see a dysfunction with menstrual health, but they may see GI dysfunction and mood disorders. They may never have a bone issue, but they may start to see immune system, much more illness and sickness. And then maybe they're not responding to training adaptation, like their bodies aren't adapting to their training. So everybody kind of responds differently over time, but certainly those like shorter term consequences of just more fatigue, just having trouble finishing workouts, things like that are certainly things that we want to take notice of. And just whenever I find that working with athletes, oftentimes they start to kind of say, it's just kind of harder to make it through my workouts. My legs feel heavy. It just feels hard. And those are things that always make my ears perk up and say, okay, let's make sure that we're getting enough in.
I feel like in the IBD population, oftentimes the thing that we jump to is I must not be absorbing anything that I'm consuming before we think about underfueling. Like I know that's the first place we go because we hear about all the nutrient deficiencies that are possible with IBD, and we talk a lot about those. But I definitely think a lot of times it is this underfueling component, or just not getting enough of that just baseline what you need that can drive a lot of fatigue.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think it's, worthwhile to take into consideration the absorption of nutrients. But you're right. Like if we're not meeting baseline needs and looking at it based on how much activity we're asking our bodies to do, we're never going to be able to function the way we're supposed to.
Yeah. And I guess in a sense, they're all nutrients, like just different types. The micronutrients are your B vitamins, macronutrients are your protein, carbohydrates, fat. We don't think about it that way, but they are.
And all essential. You just have differing amounts that we need them in.
And water.
Yes,
just because I'm thirsty.
It's so true.
Christa, what exactly happens to the gut when someone is underfueling?
Yeah, I mean, essentially everything slows down, and it's not a priority, right? If we don't have enough energy coming in and we're asking our bodies are always going to prioritize movement, because if you think just over the course of history with humanity, like we have to be able to escape whatever danger there is. So we always will prioritize movement. And so if we're asking our bodies to move, then even if we don't have enough energy, the body's going to say, okay, we have to do that. So it's going to pull from all of these other areas. So, you pull from bone and you pull from muscle to be able to meet the requirement of the energy requirement. And the gut is not a priority in that situation, right? We need to make sure that brain, heart, lungs are staying in homeostasis, and the gut doesn't have to do that. And so blood flow decreases, and that happens already with movement, but we just see it's slowing down. And so that ends up making it over time, that makes it harder to eat, to be able to actually digest and break down all those nutrients in the food. And so a lot of times what we'll notice symptomatically is lots of bloating and constipation. It's because of that slowed down peristalsis that happens over time. And so it's like this not great cyclical thing. It gets harder to eat, and then so you're not eating as much, and then you're still probably having some activity, and then it slows down even further, and then you're having more symptoms, and it just becomes really challenging.
One thing you said that stood out to me was that when you underfuel, your body pulls from other places, so pulling from your bone and muscle to get those nutrients. And wanted to emphasize that because it may not be something that we immediately think about as someone who may not be a dietitian. But I think that's just really important to note that if your body's not getting enough, it's going to pull from somewhere else, which, 80-year-old you, we want to make sure 80-year-old you is not in a bad spot. So fueling now and every day can be helpful for 80-year-old you to think of future you.
Yeah.
And future you 6 months from now or a year from now. It honestly could impact that. Like you could be more prone to injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hormonal changes that happen in a negative, especially a chronic negative energy balance, are so widespread. I mean, we see decreases in leptin, increases in cortisol, which then makes us a little bit more insulin resistant. There's increased ghrelin, thyroid hormones decrease, and all of those things drive those other physiological factors that we talked about earlier and all those different systems that are being impacted. But it's because we have all of these hormonal changes that are really meant for our survival, right? Like those are great adaptations that the body taps into so that we can survive. And if there is any sort of famine or whatever the case may be, your body doesn't know that if you're doing it intentionally or not. So it's great feedback loops that we have, but we don't want that chronically, right? We want to be able to have by and large, we need an energy balance.
It's so interesting.
And I feel like we're kind of conditioned, especially I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like as a female in the exercising world, you're kind of conditioned that you should just live in a chronic energy deficit. That's just who you should be. And then considering all of these, negative impacts to hormones and body systems, that is so untrue.
Yeah. And it can impact females differently.
Yeah.
And also affect your nervous system quite a bit. Like what have you seen with that in terms of how it impacts someone's emotional state or nervous system?
Yeah. I feel like this is another one of those early indicators, or it can be for a lot of people, and especially females. We do not fare well in negative energy balance by and large, because we really do need to maintain that higher body fat percentage for all of these hormones to circulate properly, especially when we're in childbearing ages, because the body is trying to protect us to be able to bear children. If we're not sitting at high enough body fat, we don't have enough leptin, then we can't effectively carry children and feed them. And so the body's going to shut all of that down if there's any sense that we don't have enough. And so our feedback loops are much more tightly regulated. Like men can get away with a lot more, usually can get away with a lot more than we can. We're much more sensitive. And so oftentimes I'll see this in practice, that especially my female athletes, they'll start to become a little bit more rigid in their thinking, a little bit more black and white, less social. So social situations start to become really anxious, so they tend to pull back. And then mood disorders tend to be either heightened or start to become apparent. So lots of mood swings or just having difficulty concentrating. And all of those are because the brain, there's just not enough energy coming in. And so that there's that conservation idea again. And so the brain really does start to shrink. And so just only focusing on what needs to happen, what the body needs to survive.
Do you know, like, at what point or how many months of underfueling that starts with? Or is it like, weeks?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's so individualized. I don't know if there is a specific answer, but I certainly know, just anecdotally, just working with people, this can certainly you'll at least start to see some of these initial effects over the course of a few months. When I'm kind of listening to other veteran practitioners and people that work in REDS often, they'll always say, like, the longer that you're in this relative energy deficiency, you're in this energy deficit, then the more time that it takes to reverse and like normalize everything. So, if we can kind of catch it early on, then we can stop it reverse it and bring the body back to a normal and safe spot. But if we let this go for years and years and years, it takes a lot of time for the body to feel comfortable enough to like bring those hormones back online, for the menstrual cycle to reestablish itself, for, and sometimes, like, especially if this starts to happen, like, let's say in adolescence or late adolescence, where we're really supposed to be maxing out that bone formation process and we don't do that, then bone will forever take a hit. We really can't get that time back as far as like bone goes. So there's some of these things that will like never normalize if we don't correct it, early on.
Gosh, I really wish that I would have heard some of these things in high school,
Right.
because I think too, it's almost as if like every 90s, early 2000s athlete, I feel like around me had some version of an eating disorder.
Right.
And as a runner, we had this idea or thought, I don't know where it came from, that like if you are lighter, you perform better.
Yep.
And it was kind of this pervasive thought throughout. You could see it everywhere. And there was some partial truth to it, of like, you might see that in a very short-term sense, less weight,
Right. Everybody has a honeymoon period.
Yeah. But for me, it ended up being, I trained all summer with this girl who we were trying to make it to this, like, to the state level and stuff. And she ate really well. She was one of the few. We were at the same level, but she went on. I didn't even make it past the districts because my fueling was just so awful. It was like rice for lunch, like carrots. It's bizarre to even think how I got by,
Right.
With that kind of. And I can think back to that time and everything you're saying of rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because for me during that time we had moved to like middle high school, and so there was a lot of isolation and rigid thinking. It was like the thing you could control, and it was
Yep.
that whole perfect scenario. But for sure nowadays, even just from those years of doing that and not having a period and all that,
Right.
I do have bone and joint issues, and some of them that are, it shows up in different ways. Like there's some areas that you can repair a little bit, but the damage is definitely evident when you've gone long periods of time like that.
Yeah. And just increasing awareness is so helpful. And like, hey, we can really make a big difference over the course of your lifespan just by fueling well.
Yeah, for sure. And
if you put that into perspective of like an IBD athlete who may already have some, challenges related to bone formation and for, dealing with medications and things like that, I mean, it becomes even more of a priority.
Yeah. I was an IBD athlete for a short stint of time, and I can remember when I had IBD, and I mean, I was fueling better for a while. A big difference when you're fueling appropriately and taking care of yourself. Yeah, it can make a huge difference. So I'm glad there are people out there like you that are, educating on this and talking about it.
Yeah.
Do you have any case studies or maybe patients that come to mind where you've kind of seen just like this transformation that you're after with each person?
Yeah, I think a couple come to mind. I had one girl that was kind of similar to what we were just talking about. Very similar, actually. She was a collegiate runner and kind of driven by coaches on it's the weight to power ratio kind of thing, as far as making sure that she's sitting at an appropriate weight. But that kind of took a toll on her thinking, and she kind of took it too far and started to be really strict with what she was eating, be really strict with carbohydrates. And so just not enough carbs coming in, not great timing of carbohydrates, and things like that. And so ended up with certainly in low energy availability, and then started to get hurt. And so that's when she started to kind of like be, oh, maybe there's a problem here. And that's when I got called in. So we started to have multiple injuries, and then we started to see, fractures and things like that. Period had been missing for 10 months at that point. And so starting to see this massive decline. And she was coming out of her honeymoon period. She was performing really, really well in those early months, of restriction. And that's what usually happens. And that kind of keeps you in that restriction because you do perform a little bit better, but it will catch up with you. And so when I came in, it was starting to catch up with her, and she wasn't performing as well. And it was bordering on that pathological. So we were moving toward an eating disorder. And so kind of what you were talking about, that rigid thinking, that black and white thinking, that really does lend itself to an eating disorder, a pathological eating disorder mindset. So if we can intercept that early too, we can effectively prevent against an eating disorder. So anyway, that's my whole goal was kind of correcting the energy balance, correcting the carbohydrate availability, correcting fluids, and then also helping to kind of support the mindset piece too. And we did. She was so responsive, and we really did intercept right there because she did not move on to full-blown eating disorder and have to go to further therapy, and started to correct. She was very responsive to the interventions, and she did so well. We worked together for the rest of that year, and then she finished her collegiate career, and then actually did a 5th year at another university and broke records for them, and is still running really, really well. So, and we didn't have any more injuries, once everything was kind of corrected. So she's kind of the one that sticks out where, is the best case scenario.
That's cool. You really changed her life, honestly. It's amazing.
Yeah. You can't ever discount the work that she put in because she really fought against the thought processes and the stigmas and things that she was kind of believing. But yeah, it was just such a beautiful ending to all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly helps to have somebody by your side, kind of like a coach. That's powerful. I hope that I wish we could all have that, somebody that's bringing you through it, walking with you.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And you have to kind of trust them too, because I kept telling her, I was like, I know that being at this low weight, it feels good. It feels light, and it feels like you're going to be better. But you kind of got to trust me that over time, this is not going to be in your best interest. And your body is telling you that it's not happy. So we have to sit at a higher weight. We have to sit at a higher body fat percentage for longevity, for you to be able to continue to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Christa, since your experience of becoming a dietitian, and maybe more so a sports dietitian, do you feel like colleges and I guess other places where athletics would take place are utilizing dietitians more?
Yes and no. The big universities, yeah, because there's more accessibility, there's more of a budget to be able to bring dietitians on, but that's really only happening in bigger Division 1 universities. So all of the places that I have been kind of smaller Division 2s, and no, they oftentimes have no idea what to do with me, or don't have a way to bring me on, or don't have a way to pay. And so that is always a challenge. Sports dietitians don't want to work for free, and so it's hard to kind of figure out a plan that works for both parties and that makes sense. And so there a lot of times collegiate athletes don't have a ton of access unless they know someone, or if someone is kind of collaborating with the department, or if they have an actual dietetics program on campus and they're kind of doing some education through that. But a lot of times that's not the case.
Gosh, there's just so much misinformation out there about nutrition. I mean, as we all know. And yeah. I don't know, I hope people can see this so that they can see the benefit from not only working with a dietitian, but fueling appropriately. Because yeah, it does wonders.
Yeah. I think the one thing that may help in this arena, because I think you have to start these conversations even in high school, because again, that's adolescence right there. It's really critical time. And oftentimes they're either not even thinking about it, or it's really pressed upon them from their home, like from parents. And sometimes that's not always super helpful, right? Because if mom's going to have a whole different agenda if she's on a weight loss journey, and has no idea how athletes should be feeling. And pediatric energy expenditure is so high, and we often don't realize that. But I used to work for IMG Academy, and they had partnered with, I'm blanking on the name right now, and it's not going to come to me, but there is an organization that basically pairs incoming collegiate athletes. It's like a portal, so they can put their film out in their little folder of sorts online, and basically they can get looks from college athletics. So they're kind of putting all of their information out there, trying to get, scholarships. Well, IMG partnered with them and hired us as kind of consultants, and we would come in and give them nutrition education to kind of go along with, like, if they were getting collegiate looks. And I loved that idea because we were helping them understand a little bit of their fueling needs as they're going out and trying as a prospect. And I thought that was a cool intersection, to be able to help that next generation of collegiate athletes. So stuff like that exists, but you're not reaching. You're still not reaching everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need dietitians everywhere. It sounds like,
right? We're vital.
I spoke a little bit about, we know there's a lot of nutrition misinformation out in the world. I'm curious, Christa, what you would say to someone who wants to start the keto or carnivore diet and they're an IBD athlete.
Yeah, good question. So keto, obviously really high fat, just enough protein to kind of stay in ketosis, not a lot of carbohydrates, right? And so that is always going to be the issue, because whether you like it or not, carbohydrates are the primary fuel source for any athlete. So it varies a little bit with, how much, but by and large, we're using carbohydrates primarily as our fuel source. And so if we don't have enough of that, then performance directly takes a hit. And it's because carbohydrates can be metabolized in both anaerobic and aerobic situations, so with and without oxygen. And if you think about any sporting context, you need both of them. You're going to be using both of those systems. So there are going to be times without oxygen, like really intense, quick bursts of energy. So if I got up from my seat and I sprinted, there's not enough time for oxygen to be circulating. I'm going to use those anaerobic pathways. But if I'm out there a long time and I'm running for a long time, maybe at a lower intensity, I'm still using carbohydrates. So I'm burning fat primarily, but fat only burns in a carbohydrate flame. You still have to have carbohydrate. So any way you cut it, you have to have carbohydrates, and going a super high fat diet eliminates that. And you cannot outrun physiology, right? So keto just doesn't work for any athlete. And then if you think about IBD, we need those carbohydrates, we need fiber. And that's the same idea with carnivore. If we are devoid of fiber over the course of the long haul, then our gut is never going to be what it needs to be. Like, that environment is just not going to be conducive for long-term health. And so, there's tons of protein in carnivore, but again, not enough carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are the not only main fuel source for athletes, but for IBD, like, we're hanging our hat on carbohydrates too because of that fiber component.
Yeah, I've seen some weird ideas with that. So you were the blog we did on the carnivore diet, which so far in our blog history is still the number one viewed, number one commented on. We literally had to turn off the comments because there was so many comments, and it was ranked number one, which is first thing to pop up who would have thought, right? We just thought we were going to tackle something a couple people had questions on.
Yeah.
Ended up being a huge deal. And there's some weird ideas. Yeah, very touchy. There's some weird ideas. To your thought, Danielle, about misinformation, there's some strange ideas about fiber and what's actually going on when we digest fiber, and this idea that we don't need it, which which like, yes, are not using it, but our gut bacteria are using it. And so there's just some strange ideas that like have a partial truth, but it just took a weird turn.
It's so true. That's such a good point. That's a good point we could make here too with athletes, is because those colonocytes are using that fiber, they're using it also as an energy source. So you can think about that as like we're actually fueling those cells, you know, and so we're giving them what they need. And that's an important factor for keeping the integrity and the health of the gut, what it should, optimizing it.
So when you say fuel, let's talk about what we mean by that, like with fueling your colon cells.
Yeah.
So why would one want to fuel their colon cells?
Right. Well, if you don't, they're going to find other ways to do so. You know, they have to survive. And so if they don't have fiber, which is what they need and want, then they're going to degrade, right? They're not going to produce those helpful, beneficial byproducts to keep everything healthy. What else would you guys add to that?
Yeah. I know if you don't feed your microbes, then they don't have a fuel source. And so then the tendency is to degrade the cells, number one, but also you need fuel to repair if there's injury, which we have a lot of injury already with IBD, injury to the colon lining or digestive tract lining.
Yeah. And my thought process with that too was fibrous foods. Like, it's not that they only contain fiber. They contain lovely nutrients, right? Minerals, antioxidants that we all need, vitamins. So if we get rid of all of that, again, where's our 80-year-old self going to be? Or even 6 months down the road, where are we going to be? So we're fiber fans here.
Yeah. And color, definitely the color aspect. There's so much that you can't replace. Sure, you can take a multivitamin to replace the vitamins. And sure, you could take a fiber supplement even, but you can't replace color compound, like the phyto compounds in food that are responsible for so much that we've done so much research on already. You know, the antioxidants you can't replace. Those are things that a greens powder isn't going to totally, it's not going to give you all of that all that's found in one particular item. But speaking of supplements, let's talk about the number one asked about supplement in our athlete population that we see, creatine.
Creatine. Everybody's talking about it. Yeah. I'll just kind of start with the fact that I am a fan. I feel like we're never fans of things, but I am a fan of creatine.
You changed my mind about it too. Like I didn't know. Because when I was in undergrad, we had to write about different supplements in the sports nutrition class, and people had a lot of fears about creatine. Lots of questions about it, lots of questions about liver, kidney stuff, and fears. But I remember my professor being like, oh, there's actually lots of great studies about it, and only in certain contexts. And I remember still being like, why are all these questions coming up? But yeah, listening to you talk about it really changed my perspective about how it can be used and really what to look for in a product.
Yeah. It's one of those that's been around a long time. Like, I think it was first written about or understood or something like mid 1800s, and then started to be studied in the early 1900s. So we have quite a large body of evidence around it. Yeah, which shocked me too. And then obviously a lot of evidence in athletic populations, but that research is starting to go beyond skeletal muscle. But I guess, do you want me to kind of explain what it is and then talk through?
Yeah, what is it, and some stuff about it.
Yeah. So we're thinking about the supplement. It's derived from some other amino acids like arginine, glycine, and methionine. We make our own creatine, and about 95% of that is in skeletal muscle. And then we make about half of our creatine needs, and then the rest, the other half, we need to eat it through food or take it in a supplement. Yeah, so most of it in skeletal muscle, but there's also a little bit in brain, heart, pancreas, things like that. And that's kind of where some of the literature has started to look at. And then as far as like creatine in skeletal muscle, you can kind of think of creatine as like what creatine is to muscles, what fuel is to a car. So it provides that energy for contraction, for growth, for recovery. So we can understand the importance in exercising. So even when I talked about that anaerobic picture of metabolism, like if I were to jump up from my seat and sprint, I'd be utilizing what's already present in the muscle. And that's what's happening. The body is converting stored creatine into and creating ATP in this one-step conversion. And so in athletic context, we can see if we have those creatine stores kind of maxed out, then we can create energy really quickly and efficiently. And so that's kind of the mechanism behind it in athletic populations. But again, research is finding benefits that go beyond skeletal muscle, and it's through brain health, mental health, even mitigating things like sleep deprivation or enhancing blood sugar control. And I think one that's important maybe for us too is kind of helping with age-related muscle loss and reducing that over time, which is really important when we're thinking about longevity and health. So, I'm finding a lot more females are interested in it because of those brain health and muscle loss factors that it can help with.
Is there anyone who shouldn't take creatine?
Yeah, and this is kind of going along with Ashley's comment. So certainly if there's kidney or liver disease, we would probably not, but we definitely want to talk to a healthcare provider if you're thinking about it at all. But certainly if there's diabetes or bipolar disorder, pregnancy or breastfeeding, we always want to have a conversation before we even think about any supplement, but this one too.
Yeah. And one thing that I feel like I've seen from talking to women about creatine is that some of them feel hesitant about it because they feel like they're going to gain all of this weight.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that, Christa?
Yeah. And, there might be some shifts in fluid and things like that initially, especially if you do some sort of loading phase, which you do not have to do there. You don't need to do any loading phase. But if you were, you might see some of that. But over time, your benefits outweigh those, and that will normalize if there are any shifts in water and weight and things like that. And I always like to make the distinction, like, I guarantee you the females that are hesitant are actively trying to become more toned or, more like physique oriented. And really the only way to do that is to gain lean muscle. So we're saying the same thing, but in different ways, and there's a disconnect there. So if you're trying to, be more cut or toned or lean, you have to build lean muscle, and creatine helps you do that.
It's cool.
Yeah. And I think something to consider too is you still got to be eating enough. Like you still got to be meeting needs before any sort of supplementation is going to be super effective, especially if you're thinking of a performance benefit. But yeah.
Well, we get the stamp of approval on creatine.
There's a lot of evidence for it.
Yeah, good source too. Like make sure it's third party regulated and
Yeah. And you can do this through food alone. Like you can do this through food, if you don't have to take a supplement. Yeah. You know what's interesting? I love this. Herring has the most creatine per gram.
Really?
Is that crazy?
Wow.
And I never eat that.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's not a commonly eaten food, especially in North America.
Yeah, right.
Okay, herring has a lot. What are some other foods that have a lot?
Beef, salmon, pork, any of your animal milk. Those would be other like food-based options. And then obviously a supplement if you choose to do that.
Cool. So it actually helps build lean muscle.
Yeah.
What like how does it do that, or how effectively does it do that? How what's the difference between not taking it and taking it, do you know?
I don't think I have a good answer for that, but the mechanism is the same, right? Like you're more effective in your exercise, your recovery is better. So you're getting more out of your exercise. And it kind of helps to mitigate muscle loss, so you're effectively retaining a little bit better. Yeah. So that is all true. And then who knows, maybe there's some other benefits of brain and mental health that maybe help with stamina and things like that.
So it sounds like herring in particular would check a bunch of boxes then. If someone's losing muscle or trying to build muscle, you get the omega-3s and the
Herring
creatine
and salmon both.
Wow, salmon too.
Yep.
That's amazing. Great.
Any other words of wisdom for our IBD athletes? Anything you want to part with, Christa?
Oh, gracious. Put me on the spot.
Sorry.
I think just make fueling and hydrating a priority. And you can absolutely DIY this, but if you want structured help, we can help. Make it a priority to just understanding that not only are, all these body systems potentially taking a hit, but this has a direct impact on GI function too. And so if you're an IBD athlete, this is something we really want to make sure that we're doing well.
Yeah, so if you're an IBD athlete or if you're somebody that wants to really improve their performance in whatever you're doing workout wise and work on the IBD component, Christa is the perfect intersection of both of those worlds. There is no other that I know of that has that unique specialization. We're waiting to see the next IBD sports dietitian, but I have not yet seen it. So she is the go-to for that. So if you would like to work with her, she is taking patients and her schedule's opening up a little bit in the summer. So now is the perfect time to get in while you can. And if you would like to reach out to us and click the link below to find out more.
I can't wait.
All right. Take care, everybody.